The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the jihadist group known as ISIL or IS, will lead Iraq's oil-dependent economy to contract by 0.5% this year, according to IMF predictions. Well, Baroness Nicholson, 0.5% doesn't actually sound that bad, and it's not as high as initially predicted. So why have predictions changed?
Predictions have really changed because of the fall in the oil prices globally. And naturally, Iraq, as one of the key oil producers internationally, is automatically affected. The massive invasion of what I would prefer to call the Daesh, the Arab term for ISIL, meaning the so-called Islamic State, has naturally had a great impact on the whole region. The Daesh invasion has had a terrific impact on poor city of Mosul and its inhabitants. And recall that Mosul was once pre-Saddam, really, the most booming city in the whole of Iraq, bar Basra, for trade and industry because of its unequaled access to the northern region, to Turkey, and of course in that sense to Iran, when Iran is open for business again, and right up further with the Caspian Sea. So the loss of Mosul is drastic.
What's the economic situation on the ground today in Iraq in terms of figures?
Iraq as a whole has a very large income indeed, but the ministries are not yet able to offer the public services to the level of competence that the population has a right to deserve. So there's quite a gap in time and in actuality between the enormity of the funding pouring into the coffers of the federal government and its capacity to actually use it constructively. If you think that Iraq has more or less been at war for 30 years, that is not surprising. So it's taking Iraq time to get back on her feet in terms of services for her people. So I suggest that the enormity of the income, Iraq is the second biggest per capita, theoretically, income in the globe, and the government's own capacity through the ministries to be able to deliver the services that money should allow them to deliver to the same standard as other countries with developed economies, that is still lacking. And that is the same throughout all 18 governorates.
Well, Al Jazeera reported that Iraq's financial sector is facing recession. Did it ever actually recover from the US invasion?
Iraq has been at war for at least 30 years. And before that, the destruction of the head of government, the royal family, and the destruction of the whole system, which Saddam himself engineered, Iraq has been drastically unstable since then, ruled by terror and ruled by dictatorship. And you look at the impact that the Daesh, ISIL have had, their dictatorship, Saddam wasn't very far off that in his last decade at least. If you just look at health, Iraq had a really good health system, which took off the British National Health Service system, and then that of course collapsed completely with the amount of war, civil war, invasions. No health system could have survived, and it hasn't. That's why it's very, very difficult to pinpoint one single thing. It isn't a single thing. It's 40 years or more of massive horror, which has got worse and worse and worse at particular moment.
Well, let's look at oil production now, because this is, of course, at the heart of Iraq's economy. But OPEC has said that it's not going to limit production, which means the oil prices are falling through the floor. So what sort of impact will this have on Iraq's economy?
80% of Iraq's oil is produced by, I think, Shell and BP. And then in the north we have General Energy and others like that. But you see the enormity of the income that Iraq has already got and will still be pouring in, and the federal government's relatively inadequacy in terms of expenditure systems. Frankly, if they only spent a small proportion of that, the country would be much better off in terms of service provision, and the population would have all the electricity they needed and so on.
And how are other industries faring?
Very open for bids and contracts is construction and infrastructure. After this 3 decades of destruction, 4 decades of destruction, my goodness me, building is needed. This problem with the jihadists is not going to go away tomorrow. This is going to take quite a long time. So housing is needed, schools are needed. Many of this deserted population is living in schools, and many, many, many buildings are needed as fast as possible, but they must be well done.
What can be done to attract private investment, and do the rewards actually outweigh the risks?
Trade, industry, professional services are sorely needed, and it is essential to get in there and do it. It makes business sense, it makes commercial sense, and it makes huge sense for the population of Iraq and thus for the shareholders of the companies in question.
How does it make business sense?
Because Iraq has such a huge possibility of business and industry. Probably one of the biggest unexplored major energy countries of the globe. Risk is a part of life. Risk is with us always, everywhere. In that sense, I'm sorry to say that most energy countries do now offer quite a significant degree of risk. Perhaps they always did, but we just didn't notice it so clearly. Libya, Nigeria, so on. Sadly, there's risk everywhere.
Well, the World Bank ranks Iraq 156 out of 189 countries in its ease of doing business report. So what can be done to make it better on this scale?
It is never easy to do business in a country that has come out of dictatorship, because dictatorship stops people not just taking risks, but actually making decisions. So people are scared stiff to make decisions in a post-dictatorship country.
So how do you see Iraq developing in the future?
Iraq will undoubtedly develop, and I believe that business and industry, particularly from the West, with the standards and practices that we have adopted in the West, with the Anti-Briberies Act here in the USA, with World Bank standards, I believe we can transform Iraq for both her people and her businesses and her industries. All the ethics that come in with a good business, those are the things that can ground a population and can assist a government in starting to recognise what it should do and how it can do those things. So business and industry and professional services are the key to success.